Imagine surviving decades of drug abuse, countless near-death experiences, electrocution on stage, brain surgery, and even falling out of a tree at 62 years old, and still being alive to tell the tale. Sounds impossible, right? Well, not if your name is Keith Richards. This is the guy who once snorted his own father's ashes, survived heroin busts that would have ruined anyone else's career, and somehow kept on rocking while his friends and rivals fell victim to their vices. Keith Richards isn't just a rock star. He's a living, breathing urban legend. I hear that the man has cheated death so many times that the Grim Reaper gave up and just bought a ticket to the next Stones show. But how did he do it? How did Keith Richards defy every rule of mortality and come out the other side still shredding riffs and flipping off convention? Today, we'll be focusing on the insane, death-defying story of the rock star who just won't die. Pay attention, but don't try this at home. To understand how Keith Richards became rock's ultimate survivor, we have to go back to where it all began. Dartford, Kent, England, on December 18, 1943. Born to Bert and Doris Richards, Keith was an only child raised in a working-class family just as World War II was coming to an end. His father was a factory worker and his mother was a homemaker. Life wasn't exactly easy. Post-war Britain was grim, with rationing still in effect and towns scarred from bombings. But music was already in Keith's blood. Keith's grandfather, Augustus Theodore Dupree, known as Gus, was a jazz musician who played in a dance band. Gus introduced young Keith to the guitar, teaching him basic chords and fostering his budding passion for music. Keith was captivated. The first song he learned was Malagueña by Cuban composer Ernesto Lecuona, a track way more intricate than most kids his age would even attempt. That early exposure to complex rhythms and melodies gave shape to his signature guitar style later on. Keith wasn't exactly a model student. By his own admission, he was more interested in playing his guitar than paying attention in class. At Dartford Technical High School, his rebellious streak started to show. He frequently got into fights and was eventually expelled for truancy. Around this time, he reconnected with a childhood friend, a kid named Mick Jagger. Keith and Mick had actually known each other as little kids, but they lost touch when their families moved to different parts of town. Fate brought them back together one morning in 1961, when Keith spotted Mick at the Dartford train station. What caught his eye wasn't just Mick, it was the stack of blues records under his arm. Muddy Waters, Chuck Berry, it was like destiny was calling. They got to talking and realized they had a shared obsession with American blues and rock and roll. Keith was blown away by Mick's passion and knowledge of the genre, and the feeling was mutual. That chance meeting sparked one of the most legendary partnerships in rock history. Mick was already singing in a band called Little Boy Blue and the Blue Boys, and Keith soon joined on guitar. But they knew they needed to go bigger. They hooked up with another blues fanatic, Brian Jones, who was forming a band with keyboardist Ian Stewart. It wasn't long before bassist Bill Wyman and drummer Charlie Watts joined the lineup. In 1962, the Rolling Stones were born. From the beginning, Keith's gritty, unpolished guitar work set the tone. While other bands were leaning toward the polished sounds of pop, the Stones were raw and untamed. Keith's playing was heavily inspired by his idols, Chuck Berry's swagger, Muddy Waters' soul, and Robert Johnson's haunting energy. He didn't just mimic them, he absorbed their essence and spat it out in his own rebellious way. In those early days, life for the Rolling Stones was rough. They were broke, crashing in dingy flats, scraping together money from club gigs, and living off the bare minimum. Their manager, Andrew Loog Oldham, saw their scruffy look and bad attitudes and realized they could be marketed as the anti-Beatles. Darker, edgier, and more dangerous. Keith, with his devil-may-care scowl and unkempt hair, became the embodiment of that image. As the Stones started gaining traction, Keith's partnership with Mick blossomed into a powerhouse songwriting duo. At first, they were just covering American blues songs, but Oldham pressured them to start writing originals. Their first major hit, I Can't Get No Satisfaction, came in 1965, driven by Keith's iconic fuzz-drenched guitar riff. That riff, by the way, came to him in a dream. Keith famously woke up, recorded it on a portable tape recorder, and fell back asleep. The next morning, he played back the tape. There was the riff, followed by the sound of him snoring. That song catapulted them to international fame, but with fame came temptations. Keith, always drawn to danger and excess, embraced the rock and roll lifestyle wholeheartedly. Drugs, alcohol, and non-stop partying became the norm. Keith and Mick moved into a flat together in London, where late-night jam sessions were fueled by booze and amphetamines. Keith became notorious for his almost superhuman ability to function without sleep, staying up for days at a time, guitar in hand, cranking out riffs and melodies. The band's reputation as the bad boys of rock only intensified with Keith's growing drug habit. By the late 60s, he was deeply entrenched in a lifestyle of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. But no matter how chaotic things got, Keith always seemed to land on his feet. While other rock stars were falling apart or burning out, he somehow kept moving forward, fueled by sheer grit and an almost reckless love of life. Keith's rebellious spirit wasn't just an act, it was his identity. From his teenage years fighting authority to his rise as one of rock's most notorious guitarists, Keith Richards lived without boundaries. It was his refusal to conform, combined with a touch of rock and roll magic, that set him apart from the start. But as his fame skyrocketed, so did his personal demons, and it wasn't long before his chaotic lifestyle would catch up to him, leading to some of the most legendary and downright dangerous moments in rock history. By the late 60s, the Rolling Stones had cemented their place as rock's most rebellious band. While the Beatles sang about love and peace, the Stones embraced raw sexuality and danger. And at the heart of that image was Keith Richards, the living embodiment of rock and roll chaos. As the band's fame skyrocketed, so did Keith's infamy. His wild lifestyle became as legendary as his guitar riffs. The late 60s marked the beginning of Keith's descent into a world of substance abuse that would define much of his career. At first, it was booze and amphetamines, enough to keep the energy up during long recording sessions and late-night gigs, but soon, harder drugs crept in. Keith's introduction to heroin came through Anita Pallenberg, an actress and model who had been dating Stones guitarist Brian Jones. After Jones became increasingly abusive and erratic, Anita left him and moved in with Keith, a move that would spark years of tension within the band. Keith and Anita's relationship was intense, passionate, and utterly toxic. They shared a love of excess, and their home became a den of decadence. Keith's drug habit spiraled out of control, and heroin became his crutch. It wasn't just casual use. He was injecting multiple times a day, living in a perpetual state of numbness. Yet somehow, he remained a creative force, churning out iconic riffs like Jumpin' Jack Flash and Gimme Shelter, while barely holding himself together. The Stones' 1969 American tour marked a turning point. The band was riding high on the success of Let It Bleed, but behind the scenes, things were unraveling. At the infamous Altamont Free concert in December 1969, the band witnessed tragedy firsthand when a concertgoer, Meredith Hunter, was stabbed to death by members of the Hells Angels who were hired as security. Keith, fueled by heroin and oblivious to the danger, kept playing while chaos erupted around him. The concert, intended as a West Coast Woodstock, became a symbol of the darker side of the 60s counterculture. Despite the turmoil, Keith's musical output never faltered. The early 70s brought some of the Stones' most acclaimed albums, Sticky Fingers and Exile on Main Street, both steeped in blues, country, and rock influences. Keith's raw, unfiltered guitar tone was the backbone of tracks like Brown Sugar and Tumbling Dice. Recording Exile in the basement of Keith's rented villa in the south of France became the stuff of rock legend. The house, Villa Nelcote, was a lawless sanctuary where drugs, booze, and music flowed 24/7. Keith's drug use became so routine that it seemed to exist alongside his creativity. He would play guitar with one hand while shooting up with the other. At one point, his heroin habit cost him about $2,000 a week, a staggering sum even for a rock star, but Keith didn't care. To him, heroin wasn't just a vice, it was a way to dull the constant chaos in his mind. He once described it as the only peace I could find. But the drugs didn't come without consequences. In 1973, Keith was arrested in England for possession of heroin and firearms, a combination that could have landed him behind bars for years. Somehow, he dodged a major sentence and kept touring. The real wake-up call came in 1977 when he was arrested again, this time in Toronto, after authorities found nearly an ounce of heroin in his hotel room. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist. He was facing the possibility of life in prison. Miraculously, Keith managed to avoid a lengthy sentence once again, thanks to an unlikely ally, a blind fan who testified that the Stones' music had changed his life. Keith was ordered to perform a benefit concert for the Canadian National Institute for the Blind instead of serving time. It was nothing short of a legal miracle. But that close call didn't completely straighten him out. Keith continued to use heroin for a while, though the arrest forced him to confront his addiction. He finally quit heroin in 1978 after a brutal detox process, locking himself in a Swiss clinic to ride out the agony. His decision to quit wasn't just about saving himself, it was about preserving the Stones. Keith knew that his destructive path would either kill him or destroy the band, and he wasn't going to let that happen. Incredibly, even at his lowest point, Keith remained a relentless creative force. After detoxing, the Stones released Some Girls, an album that reignited their career with tracks like Miss You and Beast of Burden. Keith's guitar work was more focused, his playing sharper than it had been in years. He'd survived his darkest days and returned with a renewed sense of purpose. Yet, despite kicking heroin, Keith's troubling substance abuse didn't just disappear. He moved on to other vices, and whatever else kept the fire burning. But one thing remained constant: his ability to survive anything. Whether it was overdoses, arrests, or the complete collapse of his life, Keith somehow came out the other side, ragged, resilient, and utterly unbreakable. Keith's survival instincts would be tested again and again in the years to come, proving that nothing, not even his own self-destructive habits, could put him down for good. Even after kicking heroin, Keith Richards remained a magnet for danger. His reputation as rock's indestructible wildman wasn't just built on his past, it kept growing with each new brush with death. Quitting heroin didn't mean Keith suddenly turned cautious. If anything, he just swapped out one set of risks for another. Cocaine became his new go-to, often paired with endless streams of Jack Daniels. But drugs weren't the only threat. Keith's entire lifestyle seemed engineered to test his mortality. One of the most shocking close calls came in 1965 when Keith was electrocuted on stage. Yeah, electrocuted. It happened during a Stones concert in Sacramento, California. Mid-performance, Keith's guitar touched an ungrounded microphone stand, sending a massive jolt of electricity through his body. Witnesses say he was knocked back several feet, collapsing to the stage. For a moment, everyone thought he was dead. Later, he joked that the electric shock actually recharged his batteries. But that wasn't the only time Keith narrowly escaped death. In 1976, he was involved in a terrifying car accident while driving his Bentley back from a show. Among his passengers, his 7-year-old son Marlon. Keith fell asleep at the wheel, sending the car crashing into a tree. Miraculously, no one was seriously injured, but the incident barely registered as a wake-up call for Keith. Instead, it just became another story to add to his legend. His sentiments? At least we didn't hit anybody. One of the most bizarre and publicized incidents happened much later, in 2006, when Keith fell out of a tree while on vacation in Fiji. He was reportedly gathering coconuts, or maybe just fooling around, but whatever the reason, he fell from a significant height and hit his head hard. Initially, it didn't seem serious, but days later, Keith was rushed to a New Zealand hospital for emergency brain surgery to remove a blood clot. For anyone else, brain surgery at 62 would be a life-altering event. For Keith, just another notch on the belt. He joked afterward that the fall only happened because he was trying to get coconuts and didn't realize they were out of season. The world collectively held its breath, but within months, he was back on stage, guitar in hand, as if nothing had ever happened. Then there was the infamous snorting his father's ashes incident. In a 2007 interview with NME, Keith casually mentioned that he'd mixed his father's cremated ashes with cocaine and snorted them. Naturally, the media went into a frenzy. Keith later claimed it was a joke, but knowing his history, a lot of people still wonder if he was telling the truth. Whether fact or fiction, it just added to the myth of Keith Richards being rock's most unkillable legend. Despite all these brushes with death, Keith never seemed to develop any fear of mortality. In interviews, he often shrugged off questions about his lifestyle, insisting that he never expected to live past 30 anyway. To him, every extra year was just a bonus, a victory lap in a life he never thought would last this long. Keith's philosophy on death is surprisingly nonchalant. He seems to view danger as just another part of being alive. Whether it's dodging death on stage, behind the wheel, or from his own reckless behavior, Keith didn't just survive, he thrived. His body bears the scars, but his spirit remains unbreakable. Fans marvel at how he seemed to outlast everyone. rock stars, celebrities, even close friends who fell victim to the very lifestyle Keith never gave up. Through it all, he remained unapologetically himself, living proof that some people are just too stubborn to die. He took every hit life threw at him and kept moving forward, guitar slung low, eyes half open, smirk firmly in place. And while most of his contemporaries had either burned out or faded away, Keith Richards remained, the ultimate rock and roll survivor. But even after dodging death so many times, the years would continue to challenge him. Keith's later life wasn't without its own set of health scares and obstacles, yet every time it seemed like he might finally be done, he proved once again that nothing could take him down for good. By the time the 21st century rolled around, Keith Richards had transformed from rock's most notorious bad boy to an almost mythical figure, a living embodiment of rock and roll's immortality. His reputation wasn't just about surviving the chaos of his own making, it was about coming back stronger every single time, no matter what life threw at him. Public perception shifted from seeing Keith as a reckless rebel to celebrating him as an indestructible rock god. Fans and critics couldn't help but marvel at how he defied every possible expectation. Drug busts, car crashes, electric shocks, brain surgery, each incident only seemed to add to his legend. Even celebrities joked that Keith was unkillable. Robin Williams once quipped, "I know we may all be dead and gone. Keith will still be here with 5 cockroaches." But it wasn't just the survival that made him iconic, it was his unapologetic attitude toward life itself. Keith never once tried to play the victim or ask for sympathy. He wore every scar and bruise like a badge of honor, never making excuses for the life he chose. To him, it wasn't about living recklessly, it was about living freely, without regret or restraint. He famously said, "I've never had a problem with drugs, only with policemen." Despite decades of defiance, Keith's attitude never came off as nihilistic. Instead, it seemed almost philosophical, like he's accepted that living on his own terms was worth whatever consequences came his way. He doesn't fear death, he just doesn't see the point in worrying about it. His humor about his own mortality became a cornerstone of his public persona. When rumors surfaced about his declining health, he'd laugh them off, saying, "I'm pretty indestructible." In a strange way, Keith's enduring presence became comforting to fans. The world changed, musical trends came and went, but Keith Richards stayed the same, an unflinching, ragged reminder that rock and roll wasn't meant to be safe or sensible. Instead of fading away with age, he leaned into his image as rock's eternal outlaw, fully embracing his role as a cultural icon. Pop culture started playing into the legend too, from memes about his immortality to jokes about how he'd probably outlive everyone else. Keith became more than just a musician, he became a symbol of resilience. Even Hollywood couldn't resist tapping into his mystique. When Johnny Depp modeled his Pirates of the Caribbean character, Captain Jack Sparrow, after Keith, it was the ultimate tribute to his larger-than-life personality. Eventually, Keith even made a cameo in Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End as Jack's father, Captain Teague, perfectly fitting the role of the unkillable, world-weary pirate. Through it all, Keith never took himself too seriously. He remained as self-deprecating as ever, often making light of his own outrageous history. In interviews, he spoke with an almost amused detachment about his past excesses, as if he couldn't quite believe he'd made it this far either. That sense of humor only deepened the public's affection for him. Keith wasn't just a rock star, he was a survivor with a wicked grin, someone who'd looked death in the face and kept right on playing. His continued passion for music also fueled his legendary status. The Stones never stopped touring, even as Keith pushed past his 70s and into his 80s. He still took the stage night after night, cranking out the same blistering riffs with a sly smile and a cigarette dangling from his lips. Fans didn't just admire his playing, they admired his refusal to be tamed by age, injury, or anything else life threw at him. Today, Keith Richards isn't just seen as an icon of rock, he's a cultural touchstone, a reminder that living on your own terms is worth the risk. He's the guy who outlasted it all, the drugs, the scandals, the accidents, and came out the other side with his spirit intact. As long as Keith is still kicking, there's a sense that rock and roll itself will never die. In a world where so many rock legends have fallen, Keith Richards remains standing. He's the undying of a dying breed, the unbreakable outlaw who refused to play it safe, never backed down, and somehow survived it all. Keith Richards didn't just live rock and roll, he became it. And as long as he's alive, the spirit of rebellion and raw, unapologetic music lives on. So what do you think? Will we ever see another rock star as indestructible as Keith Richards, or is he truly one of a kind? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you liked this journey into the wild, unbreakable life of Keith Richards, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more epic rock stories, and ring the bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching.